The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the trading post, and Elena Winters stepped down on shaking legs, clutching a carpet bag that held everything she owned. The Colorado mountain town of Pinewood Creek consisted of little more than a dozen weathered buildings clinging to the slopes like barnacles on a ship's hull. Snow crowned the peaks above even in late spring, and the air bit at her lungs with an unfamiliar sharpness. She'd traveled 1,600 miles to marry a man whose face she'd seen only in a single daguerreotype, a stern-looking mountain man named Colton Reed, who'd advertised for a wife in the Boston newspapers. At 19, with her parents dead from cholera and her brother's gambling debts transferred to her shoulders, she'd had little choice but to answer that advertisement. Marriage to a stranger in the wilderness seemed preferable to the alternative her brother's creditors had suggested. Before we continue with Elena's journey, I'd love to ask you to take a moment to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and give this video a like. Your support truly means everything to us and motivates us to bring you more quality stories like this one. I'm curious, where are you listening from today? Please let me know in the comments. The trading post door swung open and a man emerged who made Elena's breath catch in her throat. The photograph hadn't captured his size. Colton Reed stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders that seemed to fill the doorway. His buckskin shirt stretched across a chest built from years of splitting wood and wrestling with nature itself. Dark hair fell past his collar, and a thick beard covered the lower half of his face, but it was his eyes that held her frozen, pale blue like mountain ice and just as cold. "Miss Winters?" His voice rumbled like distant thunder. "Yes." She forced the word past her tight throat. "Mr. Reed?" He nodded once, his gaze sweeping over her in assessment. Whatever he saw made his jaw clench beneath that beard. "You're younger than I expected." "I'm 19. My letter stated, 'Letters lie.'" He turned toward a massive horse tied nearby. "Get your things. It's a 3-hour ride to the cabin." Elena's hands trembled as she retrieved her bag. This was the man she'd promised to marry, to share a home with, to allow into her bed. The reality of her decision crashed over her like a wave, threatening to pull her under. The ride up the mountain passed in silence. Colton set a punishing pace on his horse, a great bay stallion, while Elena struggled to maintain her seat on the smaller mare he'd brought for her. She'd ridden perhaps twice in her life, and her inexperience showed in every jolting step. Pride kept her from complaining, though her legs screamed and her hands blistered on the reins. When the cabin finally came into view, Elena wanted to weep with relief. It was larger than she'd expected, a solid structure of thick logs with a stone chimney and real glass windows. A barn stood nearby, along with various outbuildings. This was no desperate prospector's shack, but the home of a man who'd carved out something permanent from the wilderness. Colton dismounted and reached up to help her down. His hands spanned her waist easily, and for a moment she felt the raw strength in them before her feet touched solid ground. Her legs buckled immediately, cramped from the long ride. He caught her before she fell, steadying her with a grip that was firm but careful. "You'll hurt for a few days until you build up the muscle." "I'll manage." Elena pulled away from his touch, unsettled by the heat of his hands even through her dress. Inside, the cabin was surprisingly well kept. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, with a cooking area built into it. Shelves held neat rows of supplies and tools. A table and chairs occupied the center of the room, and in the far corner, a bed, just one bed, covered with furs and wool blankets. Elena's gaze lingered on that bed, her heart hammering. "You'll sleep there," Colton said, following her stare. "I'll take the loft." He gestured to a ladder leading to a sleeping area beneath the rafters. Relief and something else, disappointment, flickered through her chest. "That's very kind." "Kind has nothing to do with it." He set her bag near the bed. "I don't force myself on women who look at me like I'm going to scalp them in their sleep." Heat flooded her cheeks. "I don't think you do. I can see it in your eyes." He turned away, moving toward the fireplace. "There's water in the barrel by the door. Clean yourself up if you want. Supper will be ready in an hour. Elena watched him work, struck by the efficiency of his movements as he built up the fire and began preparing food. This was a man who'd lived alone for a long time, who needed no one to manage his household. What did he need a wife for then? As if hearing her thoughts, he spoke without turning around. I'll be honest with you, Miss Winters. I'm 33 years old, and I've spent the last 10 years building this place. It's good land, rich timber, clean water. But a man can only do so much alone. I need help with the work: cooking, preserving food, tending the garden, mending clothes. In return, you'll have a roof over your head, food in your belly, and my name for protection. After a year, if you want to leave, I'll give you enough money to start somewhere new. And if I want to stay? The question escaped before she could stop it. His shoulders tensed, but he didn't face her. Then we'll talk about making this a real marriage. That night, lying in his bed while he slept in the loft above, Elena stared at the dying embers in the fireplace and wondered what she'd gotten herself into. A mountain man who'd advertised for a wife was nothing like the desperate, lonely figure she'd imagined. Colton Reed was hard as the granite peaks surrounding them, and just as unmovable. But she'd noticed something during supper. The way he'd made sure her plate was full before serving himself. How he'd added honey to her tea without asking, because he'd seen her wince at the bitterness. Small gestures that spoke of a thoughtfulness buried deep beneath that stern exterior. The days fell into a rhythm. Elena woke before dawn to start the fire and prepare breakfast. Colton ate quickly, usually in silence. Before heading out to work his trap lines or cut timber, she spent her mornings learning to manage the household, baking bread in the Dutch oven, churning butter, tending the small garden plot he'd established behind the cabin. It was harder work than anything she'd done in Boston, but there was a satisfaction in it she'd never experienced. Every loaf of bread she pulled golden brown from the oven, every jar of preserves she sealed, felt like a small victory. Colton was a man of few words, but she learned to read him in other ways. The set of his jaw when something troubled him, the almost imperceptible softening around his eyes when she did something that pleased him, the careful way he moved around her, always maintaining distance, as if afraid his size might frighten her. 2 weeks after her arrival, a spring storm rolled down from the peaks, bringing driving rain and wind that howled like wounded animals. Elena woke to find water dripping through a crack in the roof above the loft. Colton! She climbed the ladder, finding him already awake, moving his bedding away from the leak. "It's fine," he said tersely. "Go back to bed. You're soaked." His shirt clung to his skin and she could see him shivering. "Come down to the fire." "I said I'm fine. And I say you're being stubborn." She reached for his arm, but he jerked away so violently he nearly fell off the loft edge. "Don't touch me." The words exploded from him, raw and desperate. Elena stumbled backward, her foot slipping on the ladder rung. She would have fallen if Colton hadn't lunged forward, catching her against his chest. For a heartbeat, they stood frozen, her hands pressed against the solid muscle of his torso, his arms locked around her waist. He was breathing hard, and so was she. This close, she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the silver threading through his dark beard. She could feel the thundering of his heart beneath her palm. "I'm sorry," he said roughly, but he didn't let her go. "I didn't mean to shout. Why don't you want me to touch you?" The question came out as a whisper. His jaw clenched, and for a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, because I might not want to stop. The confession hung between them, electric and dangerous. Elena knew she should climb down, should put distance between them. Instead, she said, "What if I don't want you to stop? You don't know what you're saying." But his grip on her waist tightened fractionally. "I know I'm tired of sleeping alone in a bed meant for two. I know I'm tired of you treating me like I'm made of glass. I know. She broke off, searching for courage. I know I'm not afraid of you, Colton Reed. Not anymore. Something cracked in his expression. Some dam he'd been holding back since the day she'd arrived. Elena. Her name on his lips was half prayer, half warning. Yes, she breathed, and that single word was permission enough. He kissed her like a man who'd been starving, his mouth claiming hers with a hunger that should have frightened her, but instead sent heat spiraling through her body. His beard scratched her chin, his hands tangled in her hair, and she lost herself in the taste of him, coffee and wood smoke, and something indefinably wild. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. This isn't how I wanted this to happen. How did you want it to happen? Slowly, carefully. I wanted to court you proper, give you time to know me. He cupped her face in his large, calloused hands. I'm not a gentleman, Elena. The mountains make you hard, and I've been here a long time. Then teach me, she said. Teach me how to live in these mountains. Teach me how to be strong like you. Over the following weeks, he did exactly that. He taught her to ride properly, to read the weather in the clouds, to track deer through the forest. She learned to load and fire his rifle, though the recoil bruised her shoulder the first dozen times. She learned which plants could heal and which could kill, how to preserve meat for winter, how to read the signs of a coming storm. And slowly, carefully, they learned each other. Colton was a patient teacher, never mocking her mistakes, always ready to demonstrate again. She discovered he had a dry sense of humor that emerged once he relaxed around her, and that he sang in a surprisingly good voice when he thought she couldn't hear. She learned about the scars that marked his body, the claw marks from a bear he'd fought at 20, the bullet wound from a bandit attack that had killed his trapping partner, the burn on his forearm from rescuing a neighbor's child from a cabin fire. Each scar was a story, and with each story she understood him better. Colton Reed had survived by being hard and self-reliant, but beneath that armor was a man capable of great tenderness. She saw it in the way he gentled his big hands when touching her, in the wildflowers he brought back from his trap lines, in the careful attention he paid to her comfort and happiness. One evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, Elena worked on mending one of his shirts while he cleaned his rifle. The domestic scene felt surreal. This was becoming home, this man becoming hers. Tell me why you really sent for a mail-order bride, she said quietly. His hands stilled on the rifle. I told you. You told me you needed help, but you managed alone for 10 years. Why now? Silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackling fire. Finally, he set the rifle aside and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. 3 winters ago, I got caught in a blizzard coming back from town. Spent 2 days in a cave, half frozen, figuring I was going to die. All I could think was that nobody would know, nobody would care. I'd just disappear, and the world would keep spinning, like I'd never existed. His voice was low, almost inaudible. Made it through, obviously, but something changed. I looked around this cabin I'd built, at the life I'd carved out, and realized it was hollow. I was surviving, but I wasn't living. A man needs more than work and solitude. He trailed off, shaking his head. Someone to come home to, Elena finished softly. Yeah. He looked at her then, his pale eyes intense in the firelight. And then your letter came, and I saw your handwriting. Careful and clear. No fancy flourishes, just honest words. You wrote about losing your parents, about being alone, about wanting a fresh start somewhere you could be useful. I understood that. I understood you. Elena set down her mending, her heart aching for the loneliness he'd endured. I'm glad you found me. So am I. He reached across the space between them, his large hand swallowing hers. I know this isn't what you expected. It's better, she interrupted. Because I chose it. Every day I wake up here. Every day I work beside you. I'm choosing this life. I'm choosing you." The kiss that followed was different from their first, slower, deeper, weighted with promise. When he pulled her onto his lap, she went willingly, her fingers threading through his hair as his arms wrapped around her. The fire burned low as they explored each other, learning the landscape of want and need, building towards something neither of them had names for yet. But that night, they still slept apart. Him in his loft, her in his bed, because Colton Reed, for all his mountain-hewn hardness, was determined to do this right. Summer arrived in a riot of wildflowers and warm winds. Elena thrived in the mountain air, her pale city skin bronzing, her body strengthening from the physical labor. She no longer looked like the frightened girl who'd stepped off the stagecoach. Now she moved with confidence, her laughter ringing out across the clearing as she worked. Colton couldn't take his eyes off her. She'd become essential to him in ways he hadn't anticipated, her presence transforming his cabin from a shelter into a home. He found himself hurrying through his work so he could get back to her, inventing reasons to be near her, stealing touches that left him burning, but he held back from claiming her fully, determined that when they came together, it would be as husband and wife in truth, not just convenience. Then in late July, their fragile peace shattered. Colton had gone to Pinewood Creek for supplies, leaving Elena alone for the first time. She'd assured him she'd be fine, that she knew how to bar the door and had the rifle loaded. He'd still hated leaving her, but the trip was necessary. He returned just before sunset to find a strange horse tied outside the cabin and the door standing open. His blood turned to ice. Moving silently, rifle ready, he approached the cabin. Male voices drifted out. 2, maybe 3 men. And then Elena's voice, sharp with fear disguised as defiance. "I told you, my husband will be back any moment." "Then we'd better work fast." Cruel laughter followed. "Your brother's dead. Don't disappear just because you ran west, sweetheart. Mr. Donovan sent us to collect, one way or another." Colton's vision went red. He recognized the names, debt collectors from Boston, the kind who broke bones and burned property when payments came late. They'd tracked Elena across half the country. He stepped through the door, rifle raised. "Get away from her." 3 men spun toward him. Elena stood by the fireplace, her face pale but her chin raised. One of the men had been reaching for her. His hand dropped to his gun instead. "Easy there, mountain man," the leader said, a wiry man with a cruel smile. "This is just business. The girl's brother owes our boss $500. We're here to collect." Her brother's debts aren't her concern. Colton's voice was deadly calm. "Leave, now." "Can't do that. We've got orders. I'm giving you a choice." Colton interrupted. "Walk out that door on your feet, or be carried out on your backs. Decide." The tension in the room stretched taut as a bowstring. Then the wiry man's hand darted toward his gun. Colton was faster. His rifle cracked once, and the man's gun went spinning across the floor. His hand bloodied. Before the other 2 could react, Colton had crossed the room, using his rifle butt to crack one across the jaw while his boot caught the other in the knee, sending him crashing down. The fight was brutal and brief. Colton fought with the skill of a man who'd survived a decade in the wilderness, where hesitation meant death. But there were 3 of them, and one got behind him, a knife flashing toward his ribs. "No!" Elena snatched up the iron poker from the fireplace and swung with all her strength, connecting with the attacker's skull with a sickening thud. The man collapsed. Colton finished the last man with a punch that left him unconscious on the floor. Breathing hard, he turned to Elena. She stood trembling, the poker still raised, her eyes wide with shock at what she'd done. "It's over," he said gently, taking the poker from her shaking hands. "You did good, Elena. You probably saved my life." She launched herself at him, her arms going around his neck, and he held her tight, feeling the tremors that racked her body. "I was so scared," she whispered against his throat. "When I saw that knife." "I know." He stroked her hair, his own heart still racing. I know. They tied up the 3 men and loaded them onto their horses. Colton would take them to the marshal in Pinewood Creek in the morning. But first, he needed to make sure Elena was truly all right. Back inside, he built up the fire while she made tea with shaking hands. When he took the kettle from her before she could spill it, she finally broke down, great wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. He gathered her into his arms, carrying her to the rocking chair by the fire, cradling her in his lap like a child. "Let it out," he murmured. "You're safe now. I've got you." "I almost lost you," she choked out between sobs. "I saw that knife coming toward you, and I thought I couldn't. But you didn't lose me." He tilted her face up, making her meet his eyes. "You saved me, Elena. You were brave and strong, and you saved my life." "I've never hurt anyone before." Her voice was small. "I didn't know I could." "You did what you had to do to protect someone you care about. There's no shame in that." He kissed her forehead, her tear-stained cheeks, the tip of her nose. "You're the strongest person I've ever met." "I'm not strong. I'm terrified all the time." "Courage isn't the absence of fear," he interrupted. "It's acting despite it. You could have frozen, could have cowered, but you didn't. You fought for me, for us." She searched his face, and something shifted in her expression. "For us," she repeated softly. "Yeah." His voice roughened. "There's an us now, Elena. Has been for weeks, probably since the day you told me you weren't afraid of me. I've been courting you slowly because I wanted to do right by you, but after tonight—" He broke off, struggling for words. "Life's too short and too dangerous. I don't want to wait anymore." "Neither do I." She cupped his bearded face in her small hands. "Marry me, Colton Reed, for real this time. Not as a business arrangement, but as your wife in every way." "You sure? I'm not an easy man, Elena. I'm rough and hard and—" She stopped it with a kiss that seared straight through to his soul. When she pulled back, her eyes blazed with determination. "You're mine. That's all that matters." He stood, still cradling her in his arms, and carried her to the bed. Setting her down gently, he knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "Elena Winters, will you marry me? Not because you have nowhere else to go, not because you need protection, but because I love you more than I thought possible to love anyone." Tears spilled down her cheeks again, but these were different, tears of joy. "Yes, yes, I'll marry you, you stubborn, wonderful mountain man." They rode to Pinewood Creek at first light. 3 bound men, slung over their horses. The marshal was surprised to see debt collectors from Boston, but took them into custody readily enough. While Colton gave his statement, Elena waited outside, drawing curious looks from the townspeople who'd heard about the mail-order bride the reclusive trapper had sent for. When Colton emerged, he had the town's circuit preacher with him. Right now, Elena's eyes widened. Here? No reason to wait. He took her hand, his thumb stroking over her knuckles. "Unless you want a fancy ceremony." "No." She squeezed his hand. "I want you. That's all I need." They were married in front of the trading post, with the marshal and several curious townspeople as witnesses. Elena wore her simplest calico dress, and Colton had done nothing more than brush the trail dust from his buckskins. But when he slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, purchased from the trading post that morning, she felt like a queen. "I don't have much to offer you," he said quietly, as the preacher pronounced them husband and wife. "Just a cabin, some land, and a life that's going to be hard more often than it's easy." "You're offering me yourself," she replied. "That's everything." His kiss was sweet and reverent, a promise sealed before witnesses, and when he lifted his head, his pale eyes shone with an emotion that took her breath away. The ride back to the cabin seemed to take forever. By the time they arrived, the sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. Colton lifted Elena down from her horse, and this time, he didn't set her on her feet. Instead, he carried her straight into the cabin, kicking the door shut behind them. "Your leg," she protested, remembering the fight. "You were limping. I'm fine." He set her on the bed, then knelt before her, beginning to unlace her boots with surprising gentleness for such large hands. "Colton, let me take care of you," he said softly. "I've waited a long time to be able to do this properly." She subsided, letting him remove her boots, her stockings. His hands were warm on her ankles, her calves, sliding up to unhook her dress. He moved slowly, reverently, as if unwrapping something precious. When she sat before him in only her chemise, she reached for the buttons of his shirt. "My turn." He let her undress him, his breathing growing rough as her hands explored the landscape of his chest. The scars she'd memorized by firelight, now revealed in full. When her fingers traced the old knife wound below his ribs, he caught her hand. "Elena." Her name was a growl. "If you want me to go slow, you need to stop touching me like that." "Maybe I don't want slow." She looked up at him through her lashes. "Maybe I want you to show me everything." What remained of his control snapped. He bore her back onto the bed, his mouth claiming hers with a hunger that made her toes curl. But even in his passion, he was careful, his hands gentle as they explored her body, learning what made her gasp, what made her arch into his touch. "Tell me if I hurt you," he murmured against her throat. "Tell me if you need me to stop." "Don't stop," she breathed. "Don't ever stop." Their joining was a storm and a homecoming all at once. Elena understood now why he'd waited, why he'd held himself back for so long. This wasn't just physical. It was the merging of two souls who'd been alone too long, two people who'd found in each other a safe harbor from life's cruelties. When he moved over her, in her, she felt complete in a way she'd never imagined possible. And when he whispered her name like a prayer, his face buried in her hair, she knew she'd found exactly where she belonged. Later, as they lay tangled together beneath the furs, Colton propped himself on one elbow to look down at her. In the lamplight, his expression was softer than she'd ever seen it. "I need to tell you something," he said quietly. Elena tensed slightly, but his hand came up to stroke her hair, soothing her. "It's nothing bad. There's something I haven't said yet, and you need to know." "What is it?" He seemed to struggle for words, this man who spoke so rarely. Finally, he took her hand and pressed it against his chest, over the steady thunder of his heart. "Before you came, I was just existing, going through the motions, surviving day to day. But you," his voice cracked slightly, "your touch heals me, Elena, in ways I didn't even know I was broken. You make me want to be more than just a man surviving alone on a mountain. You make me want to live." Tears burned behind her eyes at the raw honesty in his voice. She pulled him down to her, kissing him with all the love swelling in her heart. "Then live with me," she whispered. "Build a life with me. Grow old with me on this mountain." "Yeah," he spoke to her, "I can do that." And he did. The years that followed were hard, as all mountain life was hard. Winters came fierce and long, testing their endurance. There were lean times when game was scarce, and the snow piled so high they couldn't leave the cabin for weeks. There were injuries and illnesses, narrow escapes and near disasters. But there was also joy. The first spring after their marriage, Elena planted a proper garden. And by summer, vegetables grew in abundance. Colton built onto the cabin, adding a second room for the children they hoped would come. They took in a pair of orphaned wolf cubs that summer, raising them by hand until they were old enough to return to the wild. Elena learned to track and hunt alongside her husband, becoming as much a part of the mountain as he was. And Colton learned to open his heart fully, to share not just his home, but his hopes and dreams and fears. Their neighbors were few and far between, but those who knew them spoke of the mountain man and his city bride with respect. They'd seen Elena fight off a cougar threatening their chickens. They'd watched Colton carry his wife 3 miles through a blizzard when she'd twisted her ankle, checking the trap lines. They understood that what these two had built was unshakable. 5 years after Elena stepped off that stagecoach in Pinewood Creek, she stood outside their expanded cabin, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. Behind her, the cabin glowed with lamplight and rang with the laughter of their twin daughters, dark-haired hellions who'd inherited their father's pale eyes and their mother's stubborn chin. Strong arms wrapped around her waist, and she leaned back against Colton's solid chest. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured, his beard tickling her ear. "How far I've come." She turned in his arms to face him. "I was so scared that day I arrived. I thought I was giving up everything, trading one prison for another. And now? Now I know I wasn't giving up anything. I was coming home." She reached up to touch his face, this man who'd become her whole world. "Thank you for healing me too." His eyes crinkled at the corners as he smiled. A real smile, the kind he saved only for her and their daughters. "We healed each other. That's how it works when two broken things come together. They make each other whole." He kissed her then, slow and sweet, while the mountains stood eternal watch around them and their daughters played inside. And Elena knew with absolute certainty that she'd found her place in this wild, beautiful world. The harsh cry of their newborn son shattered the winter silence. Elena collapsed back against the pillows, sweat-soaked and exhausted, while Colton stood frozen at the foot of the bed, his face pale beneath his beard. "Colton," she gasped. "The baby," that broke his paralysis. He moved to the basin where the midwife from town was cleaning their son, his massive hands trembling as he watched the tiny, red-faced creature that was his child. When the woman, Mrs. Garrett, who'd arrived 2 days before the birth, placed the bundle in his arms, he looked terrified. "Support his head," Elena said softly, smiling despite her exhaustion. "You've held newborn calves that were more fragile. This is different." His voice was hoarse. "This is ours, their son. They named him Thomas, after Colton's father, was born in the depths of winter, when the snow lay 6 feet deep around the cabin. For the first weeks of his life, they were completely isolated, just the 3 of them in their mountain fortress. Elena had never seen Colton so tender, so careful, as he was with their son. This giant of a man who could fell trees and fight bears cradled the baby like he might shatter. But Elena noticed something else too. Colton rarely slept now. He'd check the doors and windows constantly, venture out into the freezing night to patrol the perimeter. When she asked him about it, he'd brush off her concerns, but she could see the fear lurking in his pale eyes. One night, 3 weeks after Thomas's birth, she woke to find Colton's side of the bed empty. She found him sitting by the cradle, his rifle across his knees, staring at their sleeping son. "Colton," she kept her voice gentle. "What's wrong?" "Nothing. Go back to bed." Instead, she wrapped a quilt around herself and settled beside him. "Talk to me, please." His jaw worked for a long moment before he spoke. "I keep thinking about all the things that could go wrong. Bears waking early from hibernation, wolves getting desperate for food, someone like those debt collectors coming back. A dozen different ways I could fail to protect you both. You can't protect us from everything. I have to try." The anguish in his voice made her heart ache. "You and Thomas, you're everything, Elena. If something happened to either of you because I wasn't prepared, wasn't strong enough, wasn't—" She took his face in her hands, making him look at her. "You are enough. More than enough. But you can't stand guard every night. You need sleep, or you'll make yourself sick." "How can I sleep when—" "Because I need you," she interrupted firmly. "Not just as a protector, but as a partner. As a father who's present, not exhausted. Thomas needs you healthy and whole, not wearing yourself down to nothing." He closed his eyes, and she saw him struggling with the fear that gripped him. Finally, he nodded. "You're right. I never knew I could be this afraid." "That's what love does," she said softly. "It gives us something precious to lose. But we can't live in fear of losing it. We have to trust that we're strong enough together to face whatever comes. Together, he repeated, the word steadying him as it always did. She leaned against his shoulder, and together they watched their son sleep, the firelight casting dancing shadows across his tiny features. Eventually, Colton's breathing deepened, his head dropping to rest atop hers, and Elena smiled. Even the strongest man needed to lean on someone sometimes. Spring arrived late that year, but when it came, it transformed the mountain into a riot of wildflowers and rushing streams. Thomas was 4 months old, a chubby, laughing baby who'd inherited his father's pale eyes and his mother's quick smile. Elena had regained her strength and more. Childbirth had changed her body, but she felt more powerful than ever. On a warm May morning, Colton announced they were going to start teaching her to hunt larger game. "We've been over tracking," he said, checking her rifle. "You can shoot straight. You know the territory. Time to put it all together." They left Thomas with Mrs. Garrett, who'd become a frequent visitor and dear friend. The older woman shooed them off, delighted to have the baby to herself for the day. Colton led Elena deep into the forest, moving with the silent grace of a predator. She followed, applying everything he'd taught her, watching where she stepped, reading the signs in broken twigs and disturbed leaves, feeling the direction of the wind. They tracked a buck for 3 hours before they found him, a magnificent animal with a full rack of antlers, drinking from a stream. Colton gestured for Elena to take position behind a fallen log. Her heart pounded as she raised the rifle, sighting down the barrel the way he'd taught her. "Breathe," he murmured in her ear. "Slow and steady. You've got this." She squeezed the trigger, and the shot cracked through the forest. The buck leaped, ran 20 yards, and collapsed. A clean kill. Elena lowered the rifle, her hands shaking with adrenaline. "I did it." "You did it," Colton agreed, pride clear in his voice. He pulled her into his arms, kissing the top of her head. "You're a true mountain woman now." They dressed the kill together, Colton talking her through each step. It was hard, bloody work, but Elena didn't flinch. This meat would feed their family through the summer, and she'd provided it. There was deep satisfaction in that. On the way back, laden with venison, they encountered tracks that made Colton freeze. Bear tracks, fresh and large, very large. "Grizzly," he said quietly, his hand going to his rifle. "Big male, probably just out of hibernation and hungry." "How close?" Elena kept her voice low. "Hard to say. Could be miles away by now. Could be watching us." He scanned the forest, every sense alert. "We need to get back to the cabin, now." They moved quickly but carefully, Colton keeping himself between Elena and the direction the tracks had come from. Elena's earlier triumph faded, replaced by the cold understanding of how dangerous their world truly was. They weren't the apex predators here, not even close. They made it back without incident. But that night, after Thomas was asleep, Colton reinforced the doors and shutters. "That bear smells the meat we're preserving. He'll likely come around. What do? We wait, and if he comes, we make sure he understands this isn't his territory anymore." The bear came 3 nights later. Elena woke to the sound of heavy breathing outside the cabin walls, followed by a massive weight slamming against the door. Thomas began to wail, and she snatched him from his cradle as Colton grabbed his rifle. "Stay back from the walls," he ordered, his voice deadly calm. Another impact shook the door. The bar held, but Elena could hear the wood splintering. Through the shuttered window, she caught a glimpse of the creature, easily 8 feet tall, with paws the size of dinner plates. Colton took position by the window, cracking the shutter just enough to get his rifle through. "Get down!" Elena crouched in the corner, shielding Thomas with her body. The baby's cries intensified, and the bear roared in response, a sound that vibrated through Elena's bones. Then came the crack of Colton's rifle, once, twice, a bellow of pain and rage from outside, followed by the sound of something enormous crashing through the underbrush. Silence fell, broken only by Thomas's frightened whimpering. Colton didn't move from his position, rifle still trained on the darkness outside. "Did you kill it?" Elena whispered. "Hit it! Don't know if it was fatal." He kept watching. "Stay where you are." They waited through the longest night of Elena's life. Every sound outside made her jump. Every shadow seemed to move. Thomas finally cried himself to sleep against her chest, but she couldn't relax. Dawn came slowly, painting the sky beyond the shutters in shades of gray and pink. Only when full light had arrived did Colton carefully open the door, rifle ready. The bear was gone, but blood trails led away into the forest. The door bore deep gouges from its claws, and one shutter hung crooked from its hinges. "It won't be back," Colton said with certainty. "I hit it solid. It'll either die in the woods or learn to stay away from humans." Elena emerged on shaking legs, still holding Thomas. She looked at the damage, at the blood, at the massive paw prints in the mud, and felt the weight of their isolation crash over her. They'd survived this time, but what about next time? What about the winter when they couldn't get to town? What if Colton was hurt or sick or... Hey, he set his rifle aside and gathered her and Thomas into his arms. "We're safe, all of us." "This time," she said, her voice breaking. "But Colton, what if?" "No what ifs." He tilted her chin up, making her meet his eyes. "We can't live our lives afraid of every danger. Yes, the mountains are harsh. Yes, there are bears and wolves and 100 other ways to die. But we're careful, we're prepared, and we're together. That's enough." "Is it?" She searched his face. "Is it really enough?" "It has to be." He kissed her forehead, then Thomas's. "Because this is our life, Elena. This is what we chose. And I'd rather face every danger this mountain throws at us with you by my side than be safe and alone anywhere else." She nodded, drawing strength from his certainty. He was right. They'd chosen this life, with all its perils and hardships. And they'd survived worse than a hungry bear. But as summer wore into fall, Elena found herself watching Colton differently. He'd always been strong, invincible in her eyes, but the bear attack had reminded her how quickly that could change. She noticed the gray threading more thickly through his hair, the way he moved a bit more stiffly after a day of hard labor, the new lines around his eyes. He was 38 now, no longer a young man, even if he was still the strongest person she knew. And suddenly, the future felt uncertain in a way it never had before. One October evening, as they prepared for winter, Elena made a decision. They were smoking the last of the summer's meat when she broached the subject. "Colton, I want to talk about building closer to town." His hands stilled on the venison he was slicing. "What?" "Not in town, but closer. Maybe an hour's ride instead of 3. Somewhere we could get help if we needed it, where Thomas could have friends, where—" "No." He set down his knife, his jaw set. "This is our home. I built this place with my own hands. Everything we have is here." "I know that, but you want to leave?" His voice was flat, but she heard the hurt beneath it. "I don't want to leave," she said carefully. "I want to expand. Colton, we're not just 2 adults anymore. We have a son to think about. What if he gets sick? What if one of us is injured? What if there's another bear, or worse?" "We've managed just fine. We've been lucky," she corrected. "But luck runs out. I'm not asking you to give up the mountains. I'm asking you to consider our family's safety." He turned away, staring out at the darkening peaks. "You don't understand. This place, it's who I am. I'm not a town man, Elena. I can't live shoulder to shoulder with neighbors, making small talk, pretending to care about things that don't matter." "I'm not asking you to change who you are." She moved to stand beside him. "I'm asking you to consider that maybe, just maybe, there's a middle ground. Somewhere we can have both, the freedom you need and the security Thomas deserves." He was silent for a long time. Then, "Let me think about it." It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. Elena took what she could get. Winter came hard and fast that year, as if to prove Elena's point. By November, they were snowed in completely, and Thomas developed a cough that worsened despite all Elena's remedies. She and Colton took turns sitting up with him at night, steam from heated water easing his breathing. But the baby's distress tore at their hearts. "This wouldn't be happening if we lived closer to a doctor," Elena said on the fifth sleepless night. Colton's face was haggard with worry. "I know." Thomas recovered, but slowly, and the fear of those nights lingered. Colton began to change after that. Elena would catch him staring at their son with an expression she couldn't quite read, love mixed with something that looked like resignation. Spring arrived, and with it, a surprise. Colton announced they were taking a trip to Pinewood Creek, not just for supplies, but to look at available land. "There's a property," he said gruffly as they packed the wagon, "about an hour east of town. Still in the mountains, still isolated enough for me, but close enough that we could get help if we needed it. Thought we might take a look." Elena's heart swelled. She knew how much this cost him, this compromise. "Thank you," she whispered, going up on her toes to kiss him. "Don't thank me yet. I haven't agreed to anything." But his arms came around her, holding her close. "Just want to make sure my family's safe. That's all." The property was perfect. A valley nestled between peaks, with a stream running through it and timber for building. It was wild enough that Colton wouldn't feel caged, but accessible enough that they wouldn't be completely isolated. "What do you think?" the land agent asked. Colton walked the perimeter, reading the land the way other men read books. Elena could see him mentally placing buildings, planning where the garden would go, calculating water access and timber resources. Finally, he turned to her. "What do you think?" "I think it's beautiful," she said honestly. "I think we could build something wonderful here. It means starting over." His voice was heavy. "Leaving the cabin I built when I was young and stupid and thought I'd die alone." Elena took his hand. "You're not leaving that cabin behind, Colton. You're carrying it forward. Everything you learned building it, everything you survived there, that comes with us. We're not running away. We're growing." He looked down at her, this woman who'd transformed his life in ways he never could have imagined. "When did you get so wise?" "I had a good teacher." She squeezed his fingers. "So, do we make an offer?" Colton turned back to the valley, watching the afternoon light paint the peaks gold. Then he nodded. "Yeah, let's build our future here." The process of moving was slow and painful. They couldn't abandon the original cabin completely. It would serve as a hunting camp and emergency shelter. But over the summer and fall, Colton and hired help from town built a new home in the valley, larger and more comfortable, with separate rooms for Thomas and the additional children they hoped would come. Elena split her time between the two places, maintaining the old cabin while preparing the new one. It was exhausting work, but exciting too. This wasn't just a house, it was a statement of faith in their future. The first winter in the new valley was easier than any they'd experienced in the high cabin. When Thomas caught a cold, they could ride to town for the doctor. When supplies ran low, they didn't have to risk dangerous trips through blizzards. And when spring came, neighbors began to appear. Other families looking for land on the edge of wilderness. People who understood the pull of the mountains, but also valued community. Elena made friends among the neighboring women, and Colton, despite his protests, found himself appreciating having other men nearby to trade labor and skills with. They weren't living on top of each other, but they also weren't alone anymore. Thomas thrived in the new environment, growing strong and fearless, climbing trees and splashing in the stream. When he turned 3, they were surprised by the arrival of twin daughters, dark-haired, pale-eyed beauties who had their father wrapped around their tiny fingers from birth. Colton built additions to the house to accommodate their growing family, and Elena planted an expansive garden. They acquired chickens, pigs, and a milk cow. Life became, in its way, almost comfortable. But comfort, Elena learned, could be dangerous in its own way. it could make you forget how quickly everything could change. The news reached them on a crisp autumn afternoon. A rider came from Pinewood Creek with a message for Colton. A telegram from Boston. His brother, whom he'd never mentioned to Elena, had died, leaving behind a considerable estate and naming Colton as heir. Elena watched her husband's face as he read the telegram, saw the storm of emotions cross his features. "You never told me you had a brother." "Half-brother, technically, we weren't close." He crumpled the paper in his fist. "He was my father's legitimate son. I was the bastard born to a servant woman. My father acknowledged me, gave me his name. But Henry always resented it. I'm sorry for your loss. Don't be. Like I said, we weren't close." But his eyes told a different story. Old hurts, old resentments, still raw beneath the surface. "What will you do about the estate?" He was quiet for a long moment. "The lawyer says I need to go back to Boston to settle the inheritance. Could take months." Elena's stomach dropped. "Months? Or I could refuse the inheritance. Just sign papers giving it up. Stay here." He looked at her. "What do you think I should do?" She wanted to tell him to stay, to refuse the inheritance, to never leave their valley. But she knew what that money could mean for their children's futures. "I think you need to do what's right for our family." "That's not an answer." "Yes, it is." She moved into his arms. "Colton, if there's money, if there's property, if there's anything that could give Thomas and the girls opportunities we couldn't otherwise provide, you have to go. We'll survive without you for a few months." "Will you?" His arms tightened around her. "I don't think I can survive without you." "You did it for 33 years before I arrived," she pointed out. "That wasn't living. That was just existing." He buried his face in her hair. "Elena, I don't want to leave you. The thought of being separated for months?" "Then we'll make the most of the time before you go," she interrupted. "And we'll write letters every week. And when you come back, we'll have money to send our children to proper schools, to give them choices we never had." He pulled back to look at her. "You're too good for me. You know that?" "I know." She smiled through threatening tears. "That's why you're going to go to Boston. Settle this inheritance quickly, and come home to me. Because I'm not surviving another winter without you." "Deal," he murmured, and kissed her like he was trying to memorize the taste of her. Colton left 2 weeks later, riding down the valley with his saddlebags packed and a promise to return before the first snow. Elena stood watching until he disappeared from sight. Their children clustered around her, and felt the first chill of loneliness settle into her bones. She'd thought she was strong enough to manage without him. She'd survived alone before, hadn't she? But that was before she'd known what it meant to have a partner, to share every burden and every joy. Now his absence was a physical ache that never quite faded. The letters helped. They came weekly, filled with Colton's strong, angular handwriting, describing the alien world of Boston society and how much he hated it. He wrote about the estate, a substantial fortune in property and investments that would indeed secure their children's futures. He wrote about the legal complications keeping him there longer than anticipated. And he wrote about missing her with an intensity that made her heart ache. Elena wrote back just as frequently, telling him about the children's antics, about the neighbors who checked on her regularly, about the garden she was putting to bed for winter. She wrote about the loneliness that gripped her at night, about how wrong the bed felt with only her in it, about counting down the days until he returned. October turned to November, and the first snows came. Still no Colton. In December, a blizzard struck that buried the valley under 6 feet of snow. They were trapped in the house for 3 days, supplies running low, and Elena felt the old fear creeping back. What if something had happened to Colton? What if he never came home? How would she survive here alone with 3 children? On the 4th day, when the storm finally cleared, she was feeding the chickens when she heard it, the sound of a horse struggling through the deep snow. Her heart leapt, and she shaded her eyes against the brilliant white landscape. A rider emerged from the trees, leading his horse on foot through the drifts. Even at a distance, she knew him. Knew the set of those shoulders, the way he moved. Colton! She dropped the feed bucket and ran, stumbling through snow that came up to her knees. He saw her and broke into a run too, abandoning his horse. They crashed together in the middle of the snowy yard, his arms crushing her against him, his face buried in her neck. "I'm home," he gasped. "Elena, God, I'm home." She was crying and laughing at the same time, her frozen hands clutching his coat. "You're early. You said you wouldn't be back until January." "I couldn't wait." He pulled back just enough to kiss her, his lips cold, but his mouth warm. "I couldn't spend another day away from you." The lawyers were dragging their feet, trying to complicate things, and I finally just signed everything, took the money, and left. Nothing was worth being separated from you another day. The estate. Settled. We're wealthy, Elena. Our children will never want for anything. He cupped her face in his large hands. But none of it matters if I'm not here with you. "Daddy!" Thomas's voice rang out, and then their son was barreling through the snow, followed more carefully by the twins. Colton scooped all three children up in his massive arms, his face lit with a joy Elena hadn't seen in months. That night, after the children were asleep and the fire burned low, Colton and Elena lay tangled together in their bed, relearning each other after months apart. "I kept thinking about that first night in the old cabin," he murmured against her hair, "when I told you that your touch heals me. I didn't fully understand what I meant then, but these months without you, Elena, I felt like a part of me was missing, like I couldn't quite catch my breath." "I felt the same," she admitted. "Hollow, like I was just going through the motions." He tightened his arms around her. "I'm never leaving you again. Whatever needs to be done, we do it together or it doesn't get done. Agreed?" "Agreed," she whispered. They lay in comfortable silence, listening to the wind whistle around the house, the familiar sounds of their home. Finally, Elena spoke again. "Colton, what are we going to do with all that money?" She felt him smile against her hair. "I thought maybe we'd start by building a school in Pinewood Creek. Make sure every child in the valley has a chance at education. What do you think?" "I think," she said slowly, "that's perfect. I think you've gone from a man who wanted nothing to do with society to someone who wants to build it. When did that happen?" "The day you walked into my life and showed me there was more to living than just surviving alone." He shifted to look down at her, his pale eyes soft in the firelight. "You changed me, Elena. Made me better. Made me want to be better." "No," she corrected, touching his bearded face. "I just helped you see what was already there. The man I met that first day, the one who rejected my gold and offered me what I really needed, that man was already good, already worth loving." "I love you," he said, the words coming easier now than they once had. "More than I thought it was possible to love anyone." "I love you too, you stubborn mountain man." She pulled him down for a kiss. "Now welcome home properly." He grinned, that rare, beautiful smile that still took her breath away, and proceeded to do exactly that. The years continued to roll past, marked by seasons and growth. The school was built, funded by Colton's inheritance, and Thomas was among its first students. The twins followed, bright and eager to learn. More families moved into the valley, drawn by the combination of opportunity and freedom it offered. Colton built a small sawmill, providing lumber for the growing community while maintaining his traplines in the high mountains. He never lost his connection to the wilderness, still disappearing for days at a time to check his traps or hunt. But he always came home. Always. Elena became the valley's unofficial doctor, her knowledge of herbs and healing expanding with each passing year. She delivered babies, set broken bones, and nursed the sick through fevers. Her garden became legendary, and she taught other women how to make the mountain soil yield its bounty. Together, they built not just a home, but a legacy, a place where their children and grandchildren could thrive, where the harsh beauty of the mountains met the warmth of community. On their 20th anniversary, Colton took Elena back to the old cabin. They'd maintained it over the years, using it occasionally for hunting trips or when they needed to escape the increasing bustle of valley life. But this time was different. This was a pilgrimage to where it all began. The cabin looked smaller than Elena remembered, weathered by 2 decades of mountain storms. But when Colton opened the door, she was struck by how much remained unchanged. The stone fireplace, the fur-covered bed, the table where they'd shared countless meals. "I came here when I was 23, Colton said quietly, standing in the center of the room, angry at the world, wanting nothing to do with people. I thought if I could just be alone enough, be self-sufficient enough, I could prove I didn't need anyone." "What changed?" Elena asked, though she knew the answer. "You did." He turned to face her. "You walked into my life scared and desperate, and instead of letting you stay scared and desperate, you decided to be brave. You decided to live, not just survive, and you taught me to do the same." Elena moved to him, this man who'd been her whole world for 20 years. He was 58 now, his hair mostly silver, his body bearing the marks of hard mountain living. But he was still her Colton, still strong, still protective, still capable of taking her breath away with a look. "Do you have any regrets?" she asked, "about the life we chose?" "Not a single one." He cupped her face tenderly. "Every scar, every hardship, every moment of fear or pain, I'd do it all again for this, for you, for the family we built." "Even the grizzly bear?" He laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest. "Even the bear, though I could have done without the months in Boston." Agreed. She went up on her toes to kiss him. "Take me to bed, mountain man. Let's remember what it was like when it was just us." He did, and as they lay together afterward, in the same bed where they'd first joined as husband and wife, Elena marveled at how far they'd come. From 2 broken people seeking shelter from their respective storms, they'd become something unbreakable, a partnership forged in hardship and tempered by love. "Your touch still heals me," Colton murmured drowsily. "Every day, every night, always." "And yours heals me," Elena replied, pressing her lips to his scarred shoulder. "Always." Outside, the wind sang through the pines, and the mountains stood eternal watch. Inside, 2 souls who'd found each other against all odds, slept wrapped in each other's arms, proof that even in the harshest wilderness, love could not only survive, but flourish. And their story, of a mail-order bride and a mountain man who saved each other, would be told for generations in the valley they'd helped build. A reminder that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is open your heart to the possibility of healing. Together, they'd found their home. Together, they'd found their peace. Together, they'd found their forever. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale from. Are you listening at home, during your commute, or perhaps while working? Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. What did you think of Elena and Colton's journey? Your feedback means the world to us.